transfer portal closes on January 2nd.
That's today.
Which is today. So there's technically time for more guys to get in. Nebraska did have one New Year's Eve entry, linebacker Randolph Kapai from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Was obviously a sought after recruit when he came to Nebraska, had a lot of offers and opportunities, but he enters the portal. Not a lot of action though. Here's the scholarship entries for Nebraska. Randolph Kapai had never played for Nebraska, never saw the field. Javier Morton, Chubba Purdy at quarterback in the portal. Jake Applegate to Northern Illinois. And then Tamon Lyman went to Pitt. Then quarterback Jeff Sims in the portal. So those were your scholar. I mean,
light.
In the world that we live in now, that's a pretty light portal year.
Light.
It's light, but they had 2 starting quarterbacks in the portal.
That's still light.
Yeah,
defines the season right there.
You replace him with 2 Elite 11 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
Yeah, it's light. I
Funny
mean,
to
we don't
say.
know where Sims is going. Lyman, I'm not surprised, ended up in a Power 5 because of his length, and he played.
And
He
he played
looked
a
all
lot.
right. Yeah, he looked all right. Who was the other one that went to Northern Illinois? Applegate.
Applegate.
Makes sense, I guess. That makes sense. But light. I mean, and Rule told us all along that it would be light.
Yeah.
And,
Look at what they lost compared to what they retained.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
When I think the NIL at Nebraska stabilizes some of that bottom movement. Because if you're under a deal with 1890 and you're getting a guaranteed amount, and you start to look at the big picture, all right, I can go to like a lower level and play maybe, but I'm not going to get any money.
Right. Or get very limited.
And I'm going to be playing at empty stadiums. And so like you have to look at, I mean, I think you guys look at it a little bit. I think it helps maybe buy another year or
That's a great
two
point.
with some of these guys.
Oh, it's a great point about the lower part of
The bottom 30, let's
the
call it.
bottom 30, bottom whatever. It's a great point. I mean, I'm sure it's tempting for some guys, but hopefully they're getting good advice. Like, be careful here because you can end up nowhere. You can end up nowhere. You're going to end up out of football.
You can end up being playing in the middle of Ohio or Louisiana on a Tuesday night in front of 8,000 fans
and get no NIL money.
And get no NIL money. You're probably lucky to get a pair of socks, as far as the apparel.
Right.
I mean, it's.
Yeah, and you might starve. I'm joking. But no, this is a good deal here, and Matt Rule emphasizes it all the time. Nebraska student athletes are taken care of. Really, they've always been taken care of. NIL is just now another part of that.
And Javier Morton ended up at Alcorn
State, huh?
I think the kind of track record of development too. I mean, you see what the staff has done, not just here, and they're one year here, but how guys get better under them. So that's even more incentive to where you're not just kind of flailing around collecting an NIL check, not getting any better as a player. You're getting reps. You're bettering yourself as a player. You're getting stronger. You're getting all the first class resources Nebraska has to offer to elevate yourself as an athlete. I mean, why would you go anywhere else if it's between going to a bottom tier program or a lower tier program and staying in Nebraska for another year? The pros, in my opinion, seem to far outweigh the cons.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to discuss the calendar now because we've had the early signing day since 2018.
Okay.
That would have been Scott Frost, the 2017 season, the 2018 signees. That was the first year of that December signing day. And at the time, it was a groundbreaking movement, but that existed before the transfer portal. That existed before the one-time transfer rule. That existed before NIL. So a lot has changed since the implementation of the early signing day. And, now I think there's a big push to adjust the calendar. And, there's a lot of things that are in the argument, though, in the discussion, because transfers are still going to have to happen in December because those guys got to get to their new school by January.
Yeah, good point.
You can't mess with
no
that.
way around that.
But
good point, Sean.
Can the coaches, can they make December different for the coaches where they're not trying to also do their signing class and just go back to a traditional February signing day? Because the coaches will be on the road in January anyway. And then your early enrollee kids, they're going to be done anyway. So like over half your class will early enroll more than likely. And so those guys are going to be at your school in January.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of discussion. How do you adjust signing day so December is just not a giant
you'd be removing one headache, but you'd still have that transfer portal headache. But that's a big headache to remove for coaches, especially coaches
Playoffs.
that are involved in bowl games and playoffs. I mean, you can see how that would be unwieldy, and it is. I mean, Lane Kiffin called it a terrible system that Ole Miss is getting ready to play in a bowl game and dealing with he talked about it openly, dealing with flying coaches to other campuses, still recruiting. And oh yeah, by the way, we're getting ready to play Penn State. I mean, that's the thing about that.
You practice on the weekend a lot.
Yeah. Without a lot of coaches there. I mean, you're having a lot of practices without your full-time staff or just a few of your full-time staff there. In a way, it's a good problem to have. You'd want Nebraska to have that problem, but man, you're stretched. Stretched. You know,
or you could just have signing day be in the summer, like have it in August.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
because isn't the whole point like to avoid the late poaching to like with your recruiting class, right? It's basically to get guys signed and locked in going into the off season.
Signed them in August, like late August.
and one thing I've always
talking about?
yeah, so like have one before the start of the season. But the only thing that I don't like is there's no in-home visits. So why can't the spring, April and May, be like what December is now?
Now you're talking.
And April and May, in-home visits can happen, especially if those kids are going to commit and go to your school
in August.
Would
you say, okay, this is a critical question. If you're talking in August, would you say before the start of camp?
Yeah, like August 15th.
Oh, right during camp.
Or the first Wednesday of August.
Okay. Now, that's a critical thing to me because would you want a signing day on right before your opener? You know, you're full, Sean, now come on, think about all of this. We have covered camps and we have agreed it might be the most stressful time of year.
Well, you're off the road though at that point.
Yeah. Now what I'm suggesting, if you're going to do it in August, do it before camp starts.
Like the last Wednesday of July.
No, before camp starts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last Wednesday of July. Yeah.
Because right now in recruiting, there is 1 week in the last week of July that you can actually host visitors.
But that's not too early to have it.
Well, because I'd say 80% of guys are making their decisions between April and July.
You could do it. Do it before camp starts. Now, I would not be in favor if I were a coach of having signing period on August 20th as I'm getting ready for my opener.
But you
know how crazy that is.
You got to get those in-home visits though. I think it's a huge part of recruiting to let coaches come into your home.
Oh yeah.
And if they did that right now, there is no ability for a coach to come in your living room. Now coaches can go to your school and they can bump into you and stuff, but they're not going to go out to eat with you and be at your house. So they've got to figure out a way to have the in-homes be a part of the spring.
Yeah.
And then sign them in August and then let December be portal.
Yep. Now, the challenge, of course, in the spring would be spring ball. But if you're doing it in April and May,
it's after spring ball.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. So like the spring recruiting period is mid-April all the way to Memorial Day.
Yeah, you could do it.
And then
is there any momentum toward that sort of thing?
Well, there's definitely momentum towards adjusting it. And some have thought February. I don't like February because I feel like you're gonna have to spend the entire January babysitting. Like maintaining all your commits. Like you don't want to have to go visit like this year, January recruiting is 4 weeks. So imagine you can visit a kid once a week. Imagine having to visit all 28 commits 4 times. And it's a lot.
Yeah. The calendar's rough right now, the way it's set up.
There is no easy way to do it. I think it's about minimizing the amount of extra work you put on coaches during the season. Like the fact that quote unquote free agency starts before the season's even over. Like that's how messed up is that? And I know that there's been plenty of coaches that have come out. Lane Kiffin's not the only one that's come out and kind of complained about the current setup of this system and just how much coaches have to juggle over the course of the season when they're preparing for their most critical games. They have to deal with all this other stuff, recruiting players out of the portal, keeping players on their roster, babysitting guys that are committed, waiting for the signing day. Like there's so many things beyond just game planning for the actual game that these coaches have to do. And I think that's the priority. I mean, there's not going to be a perfect system, but I think if you can eliminate that as much as possible, that's kind of the path.